He is the 74th Treasury Secretary. I was flabbergasted, Mr. Secretary, 2 years, 6 months, 10 days. I would have thought you were Treasury Secretary for 8 years. That's what it felt like. Did it just fly by to be there only 2 years, 6 months, 10 days?
Tom, it went quickly. But I hit the ground running. So I had, fortunately, a year before the crisis to build relationships of trust with the president, and that relationship was clearly critical to
Can you make clear that President Bush was engaged through this crisis? The rap on him is he was not.
Oh, this man was totally engaged. He was a great boss. He was accessible all the time. Could get him early, could get him late. What he did was, during the crisis, he recognized we needed a different set of procedures. He said I was his wartime general. I briefed him regularly, and we had a very good working relationship.
If you were the wartime general, what was Mr. Geithner? How did he fit into this mix?
Well, I would say I worked directly for the president. Geithner Tim was a close partner. The relationship that Ben Bernanke, Tim Geithner, and I had were extraordinary. Mm-hmm. They were true partners. The level of cooperation, mutual trust made the working relationship very unusual.
Let's go to Lehman. I saw Dick Fuld, I'm guessing, 10 days before the bankruptcy. I did not recognize him. I'd known him for years, and I literally didn't recognize him from his exhaustion. You would have to be a CEO to really understand what he was going through. You, more than anyone, have that perspective as a former CEO at Goldman. What was Dick Fuld going through?
Oh, it had to be agony. Let me say this, every CEO on Wall Street was tested. This was a 100-year storm. They were dealing with problems that they hadn't seen in their lifetime, and that these were totally new. And many of them working to keep their company solvent. And so to be there and go down with your ship is just very, very sad.
And he went down with the ship. Your speech at the Economic Club of New York the other day, you did highlight this. Speaker Pelosi, it was something necessary for her constituents and everyone else, you dealing with politicians. The public saw this as a bailout for Wall Street rather than a rescue of our economy. My looking at the movie, my reading of the Bloomberg Businessweek article, this is #1 for Hank Paulson, is you didn't get this to Main Street, did you?
No, I was unable to make that say. It was a very difficult thing to do. Communication publicly to that broad audience. I thought it should be obvious, which it wasn't, that as a Treasury Secretary of America, everything I was doing was to save the American people. I knew how bad it would be if the system collapsed. But it was a communications challenge because I didn't want that's what we feared to come upon us. You know, the more I talked about what it would be.
But, okay, I agree, but if it was a communications challenge, it's an ancient American challenge, which is distrust of the East Coast elites.
Right.
Out of Michigan, you go to Dartmouth, all-American football player, and all of a sudden you're an East Coast elite, even though you did it in Chicago. Why should they trust guys like you?
Right. Well, I would just simply say this. Where I was at my best was working in smaller groups, working with colleagues in the administration, working with Democrats and Republicans on the Hill, building trust based upon credibility, from working together, being nonpartisan. I think for me, as a public speaker, going broadly, first of all, for people to understand what we did and agree with it, you had to understand how severe the crisis was, and you had to understand that if the system collapsed, it could be the Great Depression all over again. They would lose their jobs. And I think part of the challenge for me was I didn't want to say it quite that bluntly because we were on the edge. And when I had to decide between communicating one way and stability, I always opted for stability.
What is your best practices then for Wall Street and the elites to convey their message to Main Street? Lloyd Blankfein has been far more visible, I would suggest, than many other CEOs. Is that the message, or is there another way to do this?
Well, I think the job right today anywhere in the world, and particularly in the United States, running any big global company is much more difficult than it's ever been. There are many demands on a CEO, and one of the demands is speaking to the public and helping the public understand you and your company and your business and its value to society. And banks are a huge part of our economy. And you know, our financial system, our banking system, is the strongest in the world. It's the most transparent.
You can raise money for Verizon. We showed we can do that today.
It's the most efficient. It's a core strength. It's got some problems, but it's an honorable profession.
Let's talk about the movie, and then let's move forward, Mr. Secretary. So we don't play this movie all over again. That's where your voice cracked in the trailer. Right. That's the heart of this, isn't it?
Yes.
You don't want to do this again.
Right.
Are you confident we cannot do this again?
Here's what I say. That's the question I get asked the most.
Sure.
And we will certainly have other financial crises. As long as we have financial markets and bouts of panic, there'll be crises. Most of them are manageable. And so what we need to do is avoid these massive disruptions, like the Great Depression or like the 2008 crisis that could easily have been the Great Depression. And to avoid that, I would say the following. First of all, the system today is much safer than it was. We've made a lot of progress, but we got more work to do. We need to finish cleaning up our messes, and we need to fix a number of flawed government policies, beginning with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
Okay, well, let's get a little wonky here and talk about the issue of capital and leverage. The simplistic answer from so many conservatives is just put more capital on the books. Why is this so hard? Why does Jamie Dimon and other banking elites, why do they fight the simplistic idea of just put more capital on the books?
So the question is how much? I am a big believer that that's the best defense against failure.
So you're turning Swiss on us.
So capital. So we want capital and liquidity. And what I would say here, the banks are already much better capitalized.
Yes,
than they
totally agree. But is it enough, or do they need to be more like UBS and Credit Suisse?
Well, second of all, we have the new regs by the, put out by the Federal Reserve and other regulators, which call for capital surcharges for the biggest financial institutions. I think that's a really good first step. And on top of that, regulators now have the tools so that they can manage the failure of any large institution better.